Okay, I'm Johnny Vedmore. I'm an investigative journalist for Unlimited Hangout. I like looking into ancestry quite a lot. You don't really know a person by who they present themselves to be nowadays. You're more likely to find it out from their history, their background, who brought them up and who brought that person up, etc. In many cases, you find reoccurring manifestation of behavior within genetics in general. So you see that people do the same thing, take the same roads. When I see how people who worship darkness, how they rise to power, it's extremely suspect. And also when you get into things like that, and when you get into researching evil people, you can feel it, man. You can feel that there's something else there, that this can't be normal. If you've got a history which involves nefarious circles, and you do want to hide it. And so that's not going to be presentable to the modern man.
Well, let's begin. Mr. Klaus Schwab.
Well, Klaus Schwab, a hard one to find.
Indeed, a hard one to find, Mr. Klaus Schwab. And that is our topic for you tonight. Welcome to Armor of Truth Live number 218, Davos 2023. You won't believe what this man said. That was Johnny Vedmore. And we're going to be sharing with you some of his research here tonight. He is a true and bona fide independent investigative journalist. Suffice to say that Klaus Schwab is well educated, with degrees into the teens, maybe 20s, who knows how many. Skipping all that, let's get to 1967. Klaus Schwab gained a doctorate in economics from the University of Freiburg in Switzerland, and a Master of Public Administration qualification from the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, in the good old US of A. While at Harvard, Schwab was introduced to some very important figures, American figures, governmental figures. And you'll be surprised to find out who funded that program, the program that Schwab was a part of. But that's for later. Summer's going to tell you about that in just a bit. I'm going to set the background, how we got to Harvard, and who is this man? Is he the most dangerous man in the world? Or is he just this kind uncle type figure who just wants to do the right thing? Well, Klaus talks about this period, the late 60s, as being extremely important to the formation of his present ideological thinking. It said that it would shape him into the man who wanted to change the way people go about everything they do. Now, there's some background here with the companies that Klaus Schwab worked for, that his father worked for, that you'll hear more about later, a little bit more about those later. He went to work for his father's old company, Escher Weiss, which had a name change later on, became Sulzer Escher Weiss AG in Zurich. He was assistant to the chairman to aid in the reorganization of the merger of these companies, which leads us toward nuclear connections. Not nuclear energy, nuclear weapons. This was a Swiss company whose origins date back to 1834. More on that in a moment. But in 1967, Klaus Schwab officially burst onto the scene of the Swiss business community and took a lead in the merger the company we just mentioned, as well as forming profitable alliances with Brown, Boveri, and others. In December 1967, Klaus Schwab would speak at a Zurich event to the top Swiss machine engineering organizations, the Employers Association of Swiss Machine and Metal Manufacturers, and the Association of Swiss Machine Manufacturers. After all, one of Schwab's first degrees was a mechanical engineer. Then he had degrees in economics, then public administration, and on down the line, economics. But in this talk, Klaus Schwab would correctly predict the importance of incorporating computers into modern Swiss machine engineering. This was 1967, and he said, quote, in 1971, products that are not even on the market today are likely to account for up to a quarter of sales. This requires companies to systematically research possible developments and identify gaps in the market. He said everyone has to make use of the latest technological advances, and the computer is one of them. And many medium and small-sized companies in our machine industry should take the path of cooperation or use the services of special data processing service providers. Computers and data were obviously seen as important to the future, according to Schwab. And at this time, Schwab was helping to turn Sulzer-Escher Weiss into something more than just a machine-building giant. He was transforming them into a technology corporation, driving at high speed into a high-tech future. It should also be noted that Sulzer-Escher Weiss changed another focus of their business to help them, quote, form the basis for their medical technology products, which is an area that was never previously mentioned as a target industry for either one of those two companies that had now merged. But technological advancement wasn't the only upgrade Klaus Schwab wanted to introduce to the company. He also wanted to change how the company thought about their managerial style. He pushed an entirely new business philosophy which would allow all employees to accept the imperatives of motivation and to ensure at home a sense of flexibility and maneuverability. So it is here in the late 1960s where we see Klaus Schwab begin to emerge as a more public figure. At another talk in 1969, Schwab would state that companies using authoritarian styles of business management are, quote, unable to fully activate the human capital. An argument he would use on many separate occasions during the late 1960s. That gives you the indication, the idea, maybe he is. He's just a good guy, right? He wants to do the right thing. Well, on the morning of September 11th, 2001, don't get too nervous, Klaus Schwab sat having breakfast in the Park East Synagogue in New York City with Rabbi Arthur Schneier, former vice president for the World Jewish Congress and close associate of the Bronfman and Lauder families. Together, the two men watched one of the most impactful events of the next 20 years unfold as planes struck World Trade Center buildings or something happened. Now, 2 decades on, Klaus Schwab again sits in a front row seat of yet another generation-defining moment in modern human history. He always seems to have a front row seat, especially when tragedy is near. One of the most well-connected men on earth, and the driving force behind the World Economic Forum, the International Organization for Public-Private Cooperation. Schwab has courted heads of state, leading business executives, and the elite of academic and scientific circles into the Davos fold for over 50 years now. More recently, he has also courted the anger of many due to his more recent role as the frontman of the Great Reset, a sweeping effort to remake civilization globally for the express benefit of the elite of the World Economic Forum and, of course, their allies. During the forum's annual meeting in January 21, Schwab stressed that the building of trust will be integral to the success of the Great Reset. You often hear people, you can read, you check out articles, especially if it's CNN article, I'll show you one later, where they identify the Great Reset as some kind of far-right conspiracy theory. You need to tell Klaus Schwab about that because that's his term. Anyway. Building trust through unspecified processes. Typically, you build trust through transparency, but that's not the way he's going about it. Perhaps that's why so many have declined to trust Mr. Schwab and his motives, because so little is known about the man's history and background prior to his founding of the World Economic Forum in the early 70s. Like many prominent frontmen for elite-sponsored agendas, the online record of Schwab has been scrubbed, well sanitized, making it difficult to come across information on his early history as well as information on his family. Schwab's family may have had some tie to Axis war efforts, World War II, ties that, if exposed, could threaten the reputation of the World Economic Forum, could bring unwanted scrutiny to their professed mission and motive. The past that Klaus Schwab has worked to hide is explored in detail in Johnny Vedmore's article. We'll share the link with you in the description of this video. And this past, which is, you can find it if you're an investigative journalist or if you just do some work, it reveals the involvement of the Schwab family, not only in the Nazi quest for an atomic bomb, but apartheid South Africa's illegal nuclear program as well. Especially revealing is the history of Klaus' father, Eugen Schwab, who led the Nazi-supported German branch of a Swiss engineering firm, Escher Weiss, into the war as a prominent military contractor. That company, Escher Weiss, would use slave labor to produce machinery critical to the Nazi war effort, as well as the Nazi effort to produce heavy water for its nuclear program. Years later, at the same company, a young Klaus Schwab served on the board of directors when the decision was made to furnish the racist apartheid regime of South Africa with the necessary equipment to further its quest to become a nuclear power. Oh, what a tangled web. Klaus Schwab's past makes him a poor spokesman for his professed agenda for the present future. Yet, digging even deeper into his activities, Johnny Vedmore says, it becomes clear that Schwab's real role has long been to shape global, regional, and industry agendas of the present in order to ensure the continuity of a larger, much older agendas that came into disrepute after the Second World War. Not just nuclear technology, but also eugenics-influenced population control policies. Now, of course, the big news these days is the World Economic Forum. In 1970, the young upstart Klaus Schwab wrote to the European Commission and asked for help in setting up a non-commercial think tank for European business leaders. Now, there's more to that story. Someone will have that for you in just a few minutes, too, about how this got started and who was there at the start. In 1971, the first meeting of the World Economic Forum, then called the European Management Symposium, convened in Davos, Switzerland. At the first meeting, about 450 participants from 31 countries would take part in Schwab's first European Management Symposium. Mostly it was made up of managers from various European companies, politicians, and of course, academics from the U.S. Klaus Schwab's European Symposium was not an original idea, as writer Ganjay Aratnam stated quite coherently in 2018, quote, Klaus Schwab's spirit of Davos was also the spirit of, I'll have to hold for this one. This one comes later. Not only had the business school advocated the idea of a symposium, prominent economist John Kenneth Galbraith championed the affluent society as well as capitalism's planning needs and the rapprochement of the East and West, unquote. It was also true, as Aratnam also pointed out, this was not the first time Davos had hosted such events. Between 1928 and 1931, the Davos University conferences took place at the Hotel Belvedere, events which were co-founded by Albert Einstein and were only halted by the Great Depression and the threat of looming war. The most influential group that spurred the creation of Klaus Schwab's symposium was the Club of Rome. Now, this is a name that you're familiar with if you've been with our channel for any length of time at all. The Club of Rome is an influential think tank of the scientific elite, of the scientific dictatorship, of the scientific and moneyed elite that mirrors the World Economic Forum in many ways, including its promotion of a global governance model led by a technocratic elite. The club had been founded in 1968 by Italian industrialist Aurelio Pecchiai and Scottish chemist Alexander King during a private meeting at a residence owned by, wait for it, the Rockefeller family in Bellagio, Italy. Among its first accomplishments was the 1972 book entitled Limits to Growth. We've shared with you recently the book 2052, which is 40 years after Limits to Growth. In a short we just put out on this channel the day before yesterday, we showed you, I forgot his name. Anyway, one of the soundboards for the Club of Rome back in 1972 said it's going to all be over in 15 years. The planet can't sustain us. Here we are. Limits to Growth largely focused on global overpopulation, warning that if the world's consumption patterns and population growth continued at the same high rates of that time, the Earth would strike its limits within a century. At the third meeting of the World Economic Forum in 1973, Aurelio Pecchiai of the Club of Rome delivered a speech summarizing the Limits to Growth book, which the World Economic Forum website remembers as having been the distinguishing event of that particular meeting. That same year, the Club of Rome would publish a report detailing an adaptive model for global governance that would divide the world into 10 interconnected economic, political regions. Now, why is this relationship with the Club of Rome significant? The Club of Rome has long been controversial for its obsession with reducing global population and many of its other policies, which critics described as influenced by eugenics and neo-Malthusianism. However, in the club's infamous 1991 book, titled The First Global Revolution, it was argued that such policies could gain popular support if the masses were able to link them with some existential fight against a common enemy. To that effect, the First Global Revolution contains a passage entitled, "The common enemy of humanity is man," which states the following: "In search for a common enemy against whom we can unite, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. In their totality and their interactions, these phenomena do constitute a common threat which must be confronted by everyone together. So do aliens, I guess. But in designating these dangers as the enemy, we fall into the trap which we have already warned readers about, namely, mistaking symptoms for the cause. All these dangers are caused by human intervention in natural processes, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy, then, is humanity itself." Unquote. So it's not too difficult to understand that the World Economic Forum also holds the same opinion, that the real enemy of humanity is man. They want to get rid of you. In the years since, the elite that populate the Club of Rome and the World Economic Forum, which has just wrapped up their 2023 meetings in Davos, these elite have frequently argued that population control methods are essential to protecting the environment. It is thus unsurprising that the World Economic Forum would similarly use issues of climate and environment as a way to market otherwise unpopular policies, such as those of the Great Reset. So who is this man? Is he the kindly old uncle figure wishing to do good for humanity, or is he the son of a Nazi collaborator who used slave labor and helped the Nazi efforts to obtain the first atomic bomb? Is Klaus Schwab the honest business manager who we should trust to create a fairer society and workplace for the common man, or is he the person who helped push Sulzer Escher Weiss into a technological revolution that led to its role in the illegal creation of nuclear weapons for South Africa's racist apartheid regime? The evidence that Johnny Vedmore has seen and presented does not suggest that this is a kindly man, but rather a member of a wealthy, well-connected family that has a history of helping create weapons of mass destruction for aggressive, deadly governments. Klaus Schwab considers himself to be a pace setter and a top table player. And it must be said that his qualifications and experience are very impressive. Yet when it comes to practicing what you preach, Klaus Schwab has been found out. One of the three biggest challenges on the priority list for the World Economic Forum is the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. Yet, neither Klaus Schwab nor his father Eugen lived up to those same principles when they were in business. Quite the opposite. In January 2021, Klaus Schwab announced that this is the year the World Economic Forum and its allies must rebuild trust with the masses. But if Klaus Schwab continues to hide his history and hide his family's history and their connections to the National Socialist Model Company, that was Escher Weiss during the 30s and 40s, then people will have good reason to distrust the underlying motivations of his overreaching, undemocratic Great Reset agenda. The story of the Schwab family reveals a habit of working with genocidal dictators for the base motives of profit and power. The Nazis and the South African apartheid regime are two of the worst examples of leadership in modern politics. Yet, the Schwabs obviously couldn't or wouldn't see that at the time. It appears that he has helped to launder relics of the Nazi era, i.e. its nuclear ambitions and its population control ambitions, so as to ensure the continuity of a deeper agenda, while serving in a leadership capacity at Sulzer Escher Weiss. The company sought to aid the nuclear ambitions of the South African regime. Then, the most Nazi-adjacent government in the world, preserving Escher Weiss's own Nazi-era legacy. Then, through the World Economic Forum, Schwab has helped to rehabilitate eugenics-influenced population control policies during the post-World War II era, a time when the revelations of Nazi atrocities quickly brought the pseudoscience into great disrepute. Is there any reason to believe that Klaus Schwab, as he exists today, has changed in any way? Or is he still the public face of a decades-long effort to ensure the survival of a very old agenda? And so the last question that should be asked about the real motivations behind the actions of Herr Schwab, maybe the most important for the future of humanity. Who is this man? Is Klaus Schwab trying to create the fourth industrial revolution, or is he trying to create the Fourth Reich? Stay tuned. We'll be right back with you. Tell you what we found out.
The hammer comes down and beats you over the head for the rest of your life with a big national security stick. And so that people learn to duck their head and not speak up, because bad idea now.
This is the emergency broadcast system. This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test. Citizens are advised to take the following steps.
Find us, armoroftruth.net.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism,
Faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights and to create a new world order.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel.
This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test.
Okay, folks, welcome to Armor of Truth Live number 218. Here we go. Where are we? There we are. And by the way, folks, please hit that like button, hit the thumbs up, hit the thumbs down, whichever one. Just hit one of them. Just let us know you're here. Please, if you're not subscribed to this channel, that helps us a lot. If you can't support us in some way, that is a good way to support us. Hit the thumbs up. Leave us a comment. Tell us what you think this man is up to. Tell us if you know something no one else knows. Also, please hit that bell and enable those notifications. Don't forget to enable the YouTube notifications or you won't get any notifications, and that happens a lot. And of course, folks, please share this. you know how to do it and want to download it and share it, that's fine. Go ahead. Just make sure you tell people where you found it. All right. And let me go ahead and welcome the lovely Summer to the show.
Hello, everyone. Good evening, Saints, and all you AOT watchers out there.
There she is, the voice behind the whole production.
The voice.
Let me remind you folks that Summer posted yesterday. We have a piece up on our
we have
Substack.
a Substack. So please join that.
We have an active Substack now, and that's good. That's cool for me because I'm looking, it's a good spot for me to put out some of the things. We're constantly reading and writing around here.
Yeah, tell the people about your thoughts behind this
article.
This
is Eternity in the Heart. The meaning of life is not a mystery. So originally a piece that was written with young men in mind, because young men are specifically forgotten today, right? Because we're in a transition where the patriarchy has to be squashed, of course. Anyway, this is what this is a paper, an essay about. It's meant to persuade those who think that religion is silly, think that Christianity that there's no point, there's no purpose, to challenge those people who have a flawed worldview to reconsider. Right? Your worldview is flawed. What is your purpose? What are you living for? Okay, let's say you don't think that Jesus rose from the dead. You don't believe Christianity is true. Okay, then what are you living for? What is your truth? Is your worldview true? Does it answer all the most important questions? That's what this article is about. And so check it out and share it around. If you've got someone in your family or someone in your life or someone you know who might benefit from such an attempt at persuasion, go ahead and share it with them. Let them know. And please visit armoroftruth.net, where you can see this article, The Unauthorized History of the World Economic Forum's Global Leaders. We'll come back to that in just a second. There's the Donate tab right up there. If you click on that, you can find many ways to support us. Also, links in the description of this video. Make sure you get subscribed to our backup YouTube channel, True Normal TV, because when we're talking like this, we could be gone at any minute. Who knows?
But we are actually working on a mobile app.
That's right.
It's going to take like 45 days at least to develop, so hang in there.
Maybe a little less, but we'll have that available for you soon. I'm glad that. I wouldn't say that because I don't want to say it prematurely. So that's the boss has said it out loud, so now I can say it out loud. Yes, we're working on a mobile app for you guys.
It's officially in the works.
A way for you to receive a notification whenever we go live, wherever we are. Whenever we put up a podcast or go live on a video or post something, you'll know about it.
Yeah, because we definitely have heard back from a lot of you saying that you guys don't get the notifications when we go live.
Right.
So that'll nip that in the bud. So.
And it is a fact that this platform that we're on now has been known to limit notifications. But anyway, here's this article on armoroftruth.net. Summer, what is this article? Just a brief introduction to this article. So we're going to talk about this in depth here soon.
Well, this information from Johnny Vedmore really caught my interest when we came across it, because for you guys, our audience that's been with us for a while, you know that we've been talking about Lucian Tarnowski. We've been tracking the Young Global Leaders movement for quite some time now. And when you figure out the history of how this all goes back in time, it's not going to be a shocker at all to you. It's going to be very intuitive, but it's super interesting, and it's just reaffirming for all the reasons why we've been raising red flags.
Now, what's really great about this introduction to the full article that we have for you here on our website, you read the first few paragraphs and then you follow the link to Johnny Vedmore's website, and it's there free. But we do encourage you to also, when you find someone who's doing good work like this, support them if you can.
Yeah, support him.
Yeah, support him if you can. And but what you'll find out, this is investigative journalism. Look at this. There are so many, the research links are all here. You can trace these things down yourself. What it looks like when you see someone who's doing investigative journalism is they give
source
you
links.
Yeah, they give you
primary sources
that they use to make their argument. So check that out and support us. Support
independent creators.
Definitely do that.
Welcome to the year 2030. Welcome to my city. Or should I say, our city. I don't own anything. I don't own a car. I don't own a house. I don't own any appliances or any clothes. It might seem odd to you, but it makes perfect sense for us in this city.
The new design of regional plans is to redesign all cities to transit-oriented development, high-density development in the center of cities where you have no private space.
In our city, we don't pay any rent because someone else is using our free space whenever we do not need it. My living room is used for business meetings when I am not there.
And that goes right back to the 2030 agenda, the Great Reset agenda, where you'll own nothing, but you'll be happy. Well, if I own nothing, who owns everything? Wealth is not a currency unit. Wealth is not gold. Wealth is not Bitcoin. Wealth is goods and services.
Shopping? I can't really remember what that is. For most of us, it has been turned into choosing things to use. Sometimes I find this fun, and sometimes I just want the algorithm to do it for me.
They're heading towards, and they openly state it, they're heading towards the extinction of the human race and changing it into something else, into something which is more of a computer.
My biggest concern is all the people who do not live in our city. Those we lost on the way. Those who decided that it became too much, all this technology. Those who felt obsolete and useless when robots and AI took over big parts of our jobs. Those who got upset with the political system and turned against it. They live different kinds of lives outside of the city. Some have formed little self-supplying communities. Others just stayed in the empty and abandoned houses in small 19th century villages.
Their future is one where the sky's dark, the seas are brown, and you're arrested for things you haven't even done yet.
Even in the World Economic Forum's own articles, they talk about by that year, they hope to be able to surveil people's thoughts and even their dreams.
Once in a while, I get annoyed about the fact that I have no real privacy. Nowhere I can go and not be registered. I know that somewhere, everything I do, think, and dream of is recorded. I just hope that nobody will use it against me. All in all, it is a good life. Much better than the path we were on.
What I see is the gradual outsourcing of human reproduction to technology. What does that mean, the full outsourcing of human reproduction in all its stages to technology? Well, it means that you have full control of the numbers and full control over the type of human being that is going to come out. If you want to see the kind of world we're moving forward, it's this world. And to just give a glimpse of it, it's a world which is fully automatized, where everything is measured, where emotions are replaced by numbers.
Technocracy, in other words. Someone in the live chat's asking a question about Henry Kissinger. That's prophetic, isn't it, there, Summer?
Well, I think they might have had a look at the article.
It's not much of a secret. I tried not to give it all away in the opening segment, but if you want to know, Heinz Alfred Kissinger, his name is Heinz Alfred Kissinger is 100 years old, born in 1923. There is an old adage, my friends, and it says that knowledge is power. The prospect of acquiring all knowledge, to be omniscient. and the serpent's great deception, that with such knowledge, man would be all-powerful, omnipotent. Man would be like God. That was such a seductive proposition that it caused the first man and woman to turn from their Creator, to exchange God's perfect provision and sinless presence for the fruits of a fraud. The empty artifice of autonomy that brought sin, death, and suffering into the world. From the dawn of civilization, there has always been, at every stage, a humanist drive for competition among men to be the one who will finally succeed in dethroning God and to rule absolutely. Today we're living to see a specific plan to methodically, incrementally, and now openly secure every square inch of the earth, all of its resources, and all its creatures under the flag of a humanist, religio-scientific utopia. It is full spectrum dominance that they seek. From the quark to the atom, to molecules, to DNA, and all the processes inside your cells. The cells of plants and animal cells. All forms of life, all the elemental substances, all the land, oceans, all the solids, gases, and liquids, all the carbon, all the oxygen, all the energy, all the air, the atmosphere, the clouds, natural and artificial ones, the weather, the climate, all the way out to the exosphere, into space, and of course, the moon, with their hopes set on Mars too. Never going to happen. That's just my opinion. Another time for that. But when this urge for autonomy began, so we have to think about God's relationship to technology as we go into this conversation, this lecture, this adventure tonight. As we go into it, we want to understand what is God's relationship to human technology. How you answer that question will frame your own relationship with technology. It will affect how you decide what innovations to adopt, what industries to work in, and what guidelines to set for the tech that you use. So the first thing to understand about all of this is that sin has corrupted everything. Genesis 6:11. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. And so there it is. Technology. The ark, the pitch or tar. The ark was technology that defied all existing categories of engineering. Due to extraordinarily long lifespans at the time, just 150 years after the flood, after the ark had landed after this technological advance had been built and used for its purpose, 150 years after the flood, since people were living that long, there was still memory. Of the event. But instead of spreading across the globe, as they were commanded to do, the people, the post-flood population gathered in Babel, at the plain of Shinar. The second major story of tar and pitch. This pitch, this tar, is what Noah used to seal up the ark so that it would be seaworthy for as long as it needed to be. And now here in Babel, we have the second time this tar and pitch shows up. Genesis 11, verse 1 says, "Now the whole earth had one language and the same words." All of these residents of the earth, possibly 50,000 at the time, that's an estimate, had a single line of cultural continuity that ran back to Noah. They had one language, the same words, and they started to make a new home on earth. Verse 2 says, "And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, 'Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly.' And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar." There it is again, bitumen, tar. Same concept you saw on the ark, or used in the ark. The Babylonites had discovered tar, possibly naturally occurring in that part of the world. It was probably just oozing up on the surface constantly at that time. And they also invented a new way to fire bricks. The citizens did not start out deciding to build a city and tower. Theologian Alistair Roberts points out, they start off by discovering a new technology, fired bricks. And having discovered the technology, they decide to build a tower and a city. Man's first global vernacular breaks forth in aspiration. Let us build. Let us make. Some primitive impulse inside us demands to innovate. And of course, there is a primitive impulse in all of us, that is to rebel against God's will also. And the standing order has been, from the beginning, go forth and multiply, fill the earth. So, in unison, humanity here struts forward to collaborate on a building project of autonomy. It's not a tower just for reputation, just to see if they can do it. It's a tower of independence, the desire to be definitively separated from God, to reject God's commission to spread across the globe. Man engineers a tower to the sky. What's very interesting about that tower is how it was built. Babel is a city and tower complex. It was a premature attempt at utopia. Nothing's changed. A city temple to human rebellion, a religious center, not an urban center of atheists and agnostics, but a religious center. Babel was the new global epicenter of human worship. The goal of opening a portal to the sky. The goal of storming heaven and dethroning God and enthroning humanity in his place. Like any human engineering feat, of course it posed no real threat to God. But man's increasing ambition and power, being no threat to God, do end up threatening man himself, because the more power they're able to concentrate, the more harm they will be able to do to themselves and the world. The Tower of Babel was probably a ziggurat, a glorified pile of Legos. That was their attempt at a mighty tower. It was built from baked bricks. The bricks were novel technology. Baked bricks were pasted together with black tar, bitumen, pitch. So like we said, there was probably a cultural memory of the flood, of the ark even. And so the ark helped to inspire this technological advance that would lead to the aspirational ziggurat or Tower of Babel. Post-flood people all knew that God that God judged sinful humans. So, if you're going to build a tower to dethrone God, if you're going to create a new world order to dethrone God, if you're going to build a tower to dethrone God and break free from Him, you better be ready. Ready for what? Ready for judgment. And they were. They knew what they were doing. And they fully expected God to once again pour down from the skies a catastrophic flood. So, knowing this, if you're going to build a tower, you need to make that tower watertight. They weren't trying to reach heaven. They were trying to get above the floodwaters. All of this human engineering was meant to thwart God, or so the Babylonites thought. Of course, God did judge them, and He dethroned them by confusing their single language, which caused them to disperse across the globe. By multiplying languages and spreading mankind across the globe, God introduced new global networks and technologies of communication, travel, and shipping. These industries were now inevitable. This, my friends, if you're confused about what this is about, this is a lesson in the sovereignty of God. How do we think about technology? Technology is not evil. It's our hearts that are fallen. And so, as the instinct is today by those who are trying to create a unity under their own flag of humanism, it was the same instinct that they had on the plain of Shinar there, at this city and tower complex. And as God confused the languages, and they had to spread out. They spread out into the earth. New global tensions arose among humans that would serve to help protect us from our future technological innovations. Differing languages represent differing cultures and unique ways of designing cities, towers, and homes. So by confusing their languages, God was essentially reprogramming their sense of self, their relational connections, and how they viewed the world. Those new thoughts produced a multiplication of new religions. Interesting, huh? Babel even marks the genesis of ethnic animosity. In the multiplication of languages in Babel, God keeps man from forming a truth valid for all men. Henceforth, man's truth will only be partial and contested. And this worldview disharmony trickles down into how a given culture creates and uses or rejects certain innovations. These differences are so potent that they will help restrain us from adopting any one single technology. Listen closely as we finish this piece up, because I want you to understand that this global one world order is never going to succeed. It's not going to happen. Babel was the product of man's aspiration and innovation, which God intended to hack all along in order to create all the cultures of the earth and to set in place a global subversion that would fracture human aspiration and undermine universal tech adoption in the future. Beginning in Babel, universal consensus was made impossible. And that's good news. So what is the instinct of those who rebel against God's created order, against His authority? Operation Lockstep. The Rockefeller plan from 2015, 5 years before it actually was carried out. The idea is to get everyone moving together in the same direction. Theologian Harvey Bavnik calls Babel the beginning of race instinct, sense of nationality, enmity, and hatred. The spring of all divisive forces between peoples, an astonishing punishment and terrible judgment, never to be undone by human programs or culture, only by Christ and within His bride on the earth. That is the answer. That is the truth that you need to take from this today. This one world order is not going to succeed. It can't. It will not. The only global order that's in our future is the one that Christ will bring. But look at the contradictions on the earth today. Facial recognition is widely adopted in America, an article read a few years ago. Delta Airlines began using it for biometric boarding using facial scan, not a boarding pass, because it's faster and easier. According to Delta, it's more popular with customers. And so it's widely adopted in America. Why? Personal convenience. Simultaneously, on the other side of the earth, masked protesters in Hong Kong chopped down lamp poles that have installed on them, the government's facial recognition cameras. So at the same time, on the other side of the earth, facial recognition is widely protested. Why? Personal peril. God is still confusing the languages. He's still confusing the attempt for a global unity outside of Christ. Multiplied cultures introduced resistance into the adoption of any one technology. Internal tensions and disharmony are there to help check and limit the adoption of technologies in a fallen world. That is from a book by Tony Reinke called God, Technology, and the Christian Life. You can check that out if you like. The word science, the way we use it today, originates from the Latin, several different terms, but ultimately scientia, which means knowledge, a knowing, or an expertness. It comes down to us today, meaning knowledge, learning, the application, the whole corpus of human knowledge. What is known? Certainty. Definition of science is a systematic knowledge of the physical or material world gained through observation and experimentation. Knowledge as of facts or principles. Science is power. Remember the old adage? Knowledge is power. Well, knowledge is science. Science is knowledge, especially according to the world elites, the humanist elites. Science is power, rather control of knowledge and control of what can be known, control of what can be said, and control of what can be thought. H.G. Wells called this conspiracy the technocracy. Aldous Huxley, who was H.G. Wells' protege, more succinctly characterized it as a scientific dictatorship. And what does this look like over time? In March 1925, the state legislature of Tennessee passed the Butler Act, a law that prohibited teachers in state-funded schools from teaching human evolution. In July 1925, a case was brought against a public high school teacher, John T. Scopes. The state accused Mr. Scopes of teaching human evolution against state law. The ACLU had arranged for Mr. Scopes' defense. Charles Hughes, John Davis, and Clarence Darrow, an agnostic on the issue of God's existence, would represent Scopes. The state of Tennessee would be represented by three-time presidential candidate, Presbyterian attorney William Jennings Bryan. And so the Scopes monkey trial was on the docket of the court in Dayton, Tennessee, and was slated to hear opening arguments on July 10th, 1925. In the papers, the trial was dubbed the monkey trial. The lines were drawn, the public's attention was engaged, the case was argued for 12 days, and a media circus ensued. Now, the truth is, this case was staged. The whole thing was staged really just to attract publicity for the town of Dayton. Nevertheless, this caused great repercussions for the debate between creation and evolution and in the teaching of Darwin's theory in public schools. Now, I haven't gone off on a tangent here. There's a reason that we're talking about Darwinism here. This whole movement, Klaus Schwab and his movement, it is all founded squarely on Darwinism. From the start, those involved in the monkey trial had questionable motives. It was a staged event. The trial was held under dubious circumstances. For example, Mr. Scopes, the one who was charged, he was just a substitute teacher in the science classroom. He didn't even know if he had actually broken the law. He didn't know if he had actually taught evolution, but he incriminated himself anyway so that the case could have a defendant. The defense was careful not to allow Mr. Scopes to testify on his own behalf, possibly because they knew he had never actually taught the subject. Charles Darrow's involvement was resisted by the ACLU at first because they feared he'd make the trial a personal circus and a crusade against Christ, which he did. His involvement in the defense team caused the other lawyers, the other two, Charles Hughes and John Davis, to back out. On the prosecution's side, William Jennings Bryan, the Presbyterian, was primarily concerned with states' rights. His main defense of the Butler Act was defending a state's ability to choose its own curriculum. He was also deeply concerned with the links between evolutionary theories and eugenics. In fact, William Jennings Bryan pointedly said he was willing to debate evolution but didn't think it had anything to do with the Scopes case. All the same, Bryan had read Darwin years before and quoted him during this case. Darrow, on the other hand, admitted he had long since given up on Darwin, saying his theory was too obscure. The trial quickly devolved into a one-on-one debate between William Jennings Bryan and Darrow over religion and religious ideals, kind of like a YouTube debate today between a Christian apologist and an atheist. In a suspicious move, Attorney Darrow called Bryan to the stand as a witness for the Bible. Sensationalized accounts that grew into legendary folklore promoted the fallacy that Bryan struggled to defend Scripture on the stand, and thus fundamentalism was publicly humiliated. According to court records, Bryan comfortably responded to Darrow's attacks. However, Darrow eventually was successful in provoking Bryan to irritability on the stand. His approach was hostile, shallow, and broad, peppering Bryan with more questions than could possibly be answered, which is still a common tactic of atheist, materialist debaters today. Actual court transcripts reveal that Bryan was careful and held his composure as well as could be expected given the spectacle. But after hours of interrogation in a packed and sweltering hot courtroom, the judge shut the farce down, called it off, and ordered the entire testimony stricken from the record. Darrow's next trick, though, he wasn't done. He decided to waive the defense's right to make a final statement, which meant that, according to law, it also prevented the prosecution from making one. Now, Darrow had vowed to serve as a witness on behalf of Darwinism and would allow himself to be cross-examined by the Presbyterian, William Jennings Bryan. But Darrow had manipulated the situation to prevent any possibility of reasonable answers. Bryan, and in effect the testimony representing Scripture and creation, the creation account of Genesis, was silenced with no opportunity to reply. William Jennings Bryan died a few days later, and it was a result of poor diet and diabetes. It wasn't because he was angst-ridden and distraught over being roasted by Darrow, as the newspapers suggested. It only took the jury 9 minutes to find Scopes guilty, but the verdict was eventually overturned by a Tennessee Supreme Court. The justices declared that nothing is to be gained by prolonging the life of this bizarre case. But the trial's impact on the creation versus evolution debate was significant. The farce revealed a growing animosity toward religion and biblical views among non-believers who were willing to use the theory of evolution as a weapon against faith. Scopes' guilt or innocence was never the real issue, nor, despite the original intent, was it a legal test of the Butler Act. Rather, it was a publicity stunt meant to corrode biblical views and meant to mock Christ openly. In truth, the concept of evolution was being taught in schools all over the country and still is today, even if the terminology is maybe cloaked to make it seem like it's something else. Popular culture and the state's compulsory Prussian-style public education model was the main cause of evolution becoming predominant in public schools, not law, certainly not reasonable discourse. Later, there was a fictionalized play called Inherit the Wind, and then in 1960, a film about the Scopes monkey trial, which further sensationalized the conflict between creation and evolution. In the movie, the prosecutor is depicted as a raging, narrow-minded, uninformed Christian fundamentalist. And of course, the defense is as gentle, broad-minded, intelligent, as agnostics always are. He's just simply in search of the truth. And to this day, popular culture still prefers a good fictionalized tale rather than seeking out the truth about historical events or the truth about creation and the truth about the failing theory of Darwinism. The perceived gap between science and the Bible has widened over time, and a whole generation of Americans have extremely flawed views of the Scopes trial, extremely flawed views of science and what it really is. And of course, a whole generation of Americans have flawed views on what the Bible is and flawed views on the creation account of Genesis. In the public square, skeptics and naysayers still receive the benefit of the doubt, while Christianity and the biblical view of creation are just assumed to be backward nonsense. Now, H.L. Mencken, who is no promoter of religion, early on in the trial had joined in with the buffoonery and had spun the events in his writing to make religion look more ridiculous. But in the aftermath of the trial, he provided this quote. There is a conspiracy of scientists afoot. Their purpose is to break down religion, propagate immorality, and so reduce mankind to the level of the brutes. They are the sworn and sinister agents of Beelzebub, who yearns to conquer the world. The conspiracy of scientists that Mencken is talking about is a conspiracy of knowledge, a long-planned, well-orchestrated, highly detailed subversion of information and a redefinition of reality. Once again, by monopolizing, manipulating, distorting, and exploiting knowledge for the purpose of enslaving the whole world. Christianity has often been accused of opposing science and hindering technology throughout history through superstitious ignorance. However, a closer look, a closer study of historical facts shows that this accusation is ill-founded. Those who believe in the theory of evolution often accuse Christians who affirm creation of believing in a flat earth. There's no history, and there's no modern scholarship to support that claim either. There's no evidence to support that Christians in any era believed the earth is flat, and the Bible doesn't teach it. Washington Irving, who wrote Rip Van Winkle and the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, published a book in 1828 titled The Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus. It was a mixture of fact and fiction. Irving himself admitted that he was apt to indulge in the imagination. The theme of the book was the victory of a lone believer in a spherical earth over a united front of Bible-quoting superstitious ignoramuses who were convinced the earth was flat. In fact, the well-known argument at the Council of Salamanca was about the dubious distance between Europe and Japan that Columbus presented. It had nothing to do with the shape of the earth. Many historians have simply followed the pattern of others without checking the facts. In fact, most of the church fathers did not address the issue of the shape of the earth, and those who did regard it as round or spherical. But later, more writers repeated the error. In 1834, the anti-Christian Latron falsely claimed that most of the church fathers, including Augustine, Ambrose, and Basil, held to a flat earth. His work had been repeatedly cited as reputable ever since. In the late 19th century, the writings of John William Draper and Andrew Dixon White, were responsible for promoting the myth that the church taught a flat earth. Both had Christian backgrounds but rejected their faith early in life. Draper convinced himself, he was an Englishman, by the way, he convinced himself that with the downfall of the Roman Empire, the affairs of men fell into the hands of ignorant and infuriated ecclesiastics, parasites, eunuchs, and slaves. These were the Dark Ages. Draper's work, History of the Conflict Between Religion and Science, 1874, was directed particularly against the Roman Church and was a bestseller. The Dark Ages was a term that was just created. Meanwhile, White, who founded Cornell University as the first explicitly secular university in the United States, published the 2-volume scholarly work History of the Warfare of Science with Theology in Christendom in 1896. Both men incorrectly portrayed a continuing battle through the Christian era between the defenders of ignorance and the enlightened rationalists. In fact, not only did the church not ever promote a flat earth, it's clear from such passages as Isaiah 40:22 that the Bible implies it is spherical. Non-literal figures of speech, such as the 4 corners of the earth, are still used today as proof text. Daniel Boorstin, also in his book, The Discoverers, stated a Europe-wide phenomenon of scholarly amnesia afflicted the continent from AD 300 to at least 1300 during those centuries, the Dark Ages. During those centuries that Christian faith and dogma suppressed the useful image of the world that had been so slowly, so painfully, and so scrupulously drawn by the ancient geographers. It's all lies. It's nonsense. Christianity has often been held responsible for promoting a flat earth theory. Yet it was only a handful of so-called intellectual scholars throughout the centuries. It was the scientific elite who created that idea, claiming to represent the church. Somehow their writings made it into early history books as being the official viewpoint of Christians. 1 John chapter 4, starting at verse 1, says, "Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they're from God. For many false prophets have gone out into the world. By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God, and every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of Antichrist, which you heard was coming and now is in the world already. Little children, you are from God and have overcome them. For he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. They are from the world. Therefore they speak from the world, and the world listens to them. We are from God. Whoever knows God listens to us. Whoever is not from God does not listen to us. By this we know the spirit of truth and the spirit of error." Ephesians 4, verses 14 and 15. As a result of this, we are no longer to be children, no longer tossed here and there by waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of men, by craftiness and deceitful scheming, but speaking the truth in love. We are to grow up in all aspects into Him who is the head, even Christ Jesus. There he is. Here's John Kerry. Here's what he had to say the other day at Davos when as it was wrapping up.
And when you stop and think about it, it's pretty extraordinary that we, select group of human beings, because of whatever touched us at some point in our lives, are able to sit in a room and come together and actually talk about saving the planet. I mean, it's so almost extraterrestrial to think about, quote, saving the planet. And if you said that to most people, they think you're just a crazy tree-hugging, lefty, liberal, do-gooder, whatever, and there's no relationship. But really, that's where we are. And when you start...
Well, the arrogance. Okay, so we'll recap quickly here what happened at the World Economic Forum. There's the book by Jeffrey Burton Russell, the one that put to rest all of the ideas that somehow or another the church was teaching a flat earth, or even the idea of the Dark Ages. It's all nonsense. It was all something by a small group of scientific elites who decided they were going to get rid of this pesky Christianity once and for all. The Swiss government deployed 5,000 troops to provide security at the Davos Forum. It said, quote, "The federal parliament has set a ceiling of 5,000 troops who will serve in support with snipers during the World Economic Forum. Some of them will be stationed directly in Davos, where the annual meeting will be held. And it was held from January 16th to January 20th. And we had a new term that was, let's see if I can find one. Boy. I'll have to pull it up here. A new term, it's polycrisis. There we go. A new term, I think it may have been Klaus Schwab that coined it this week. The collective vocabulary stored in the world's great dictionaries didn't appear to be enough. It didn't hold a single word to sum up all this strife, so here's a new word, polycrisis. World Economic Forum's Global Risks Report 2023 uses this term to explain how, quote, present and future risks can also interact with each other to form a polycrisis, a cluster of related global risks with compounding effects such that the overall impact exceeds the sum of each part. Well, I don't know, Summer, what would we call this? What do we call it? I think
controlled demolition.
Well done.
And that's a wrap.
Or it could be that, but yeah, it is. That's when all these things, all of these crises come out of nowhere, right? It's just organic. Well, no. Renegade Tribune. We thought we'd stop in on their site for a little bit today. A good coverage of what was going on over the past 10 days or so. Yuval Noah Harari made some interesting comments over the time that they spent together in Davos. Harari, author and World Economic Forum advisor, someone who we covered here recently. And what was the name of his book? His children's book that he just that he put out recently. It was hang on. Us. Unstoppable Us.
That's right. I blew it.
Unstoppable Us. Oh, sorry about that. I didn't have it either.
Yeah, we covered that.
Yeah, that was. He's always making wild comments. Remember, we've shown you here. He announced within the last year and a half that this is one day, 10, 20, 30 years from now, we'll remember this point in time is when we all accepted surveillance all the time, not just in authoritarian regimes, but in democracies. We're always going to be surveilled. And he said that surveillance is not just on the lamppost.
Under the skin.
Under the skin. This week he emphasized humanity's capacity for change and abstract thinking in his contemplation of a technologically driven paradigm shift in the human condition with the framework of virtual reality. He said humanity may need to let go of timeless and ubiquitous components of the human experience, including sight and the ability to walk. Right? Because I guess what he envisions is something like the film Surrogates, where we just lay in our pod and interact with the world through some sort of interface. Did you know that World Economic Forum advisor Bill Gates holds a patent with technology using humans to harness energy? He owns a second patent which gives him the exclusive rights to computerize the human body. It's not a joke. Gates applied for and was granted a patent which gives him exclusive rights over your body. And this one from Breitbart, World Economic Forum's Davos set for record participation as 52 heads of state attended this one. But, as it notes here, that some of the delegation had asked for their names of their participants to not be shared right away for security reasons. Well, we know that is because the gig is up, right? People are aware of what's going on here. And of course, if you hadn't seen recently, Bill Gates, goodness, excuse me. Okay. Rather than admitting that humanity has woken up to the truth about this disastrous experiment, this global experiment, jabs, Bill Gates, who is not a doctor, is doubling down, taking it upon himself to jab the world by stealth, according to the billionaire eugenicist. Farm animals, including cows and pigs and chickens, have inadequate genetics. And the only way to fix those genetics is to vaccinate every farm animal in the world with new mRNA shots. There's also this week where we saw a clip of Gates talking about how we need to how the jabs weren't working as well, and he was kind of having to walk it back a little. But of course, his answer was, we need many more. We need new ones. We need all kinds of new ones. Of course, another one of the recent developments was you can't have a gas stove anymore. We'll see about that. Klaus Schwab's World Economic Forum has declared that people have no right to own their own car and instead walk or share. According to the WEF, far too many people own their own vehicles. And this situation must be corrected by pricing them out of the market. Had you wondered why prices were rising? Thousands of private jets, however, fly into Davos each year, using up an ocean of fossil fuel for the annual summit. According to Klaus Schwab, ordinary people should not own a car. But we know a little bit more about Herr Schwab tonight, don't we? From the 13th of January this year, Klaus Schwab warns of the next pandemic. A cyber attack so vast it disconnects the internet. The new internet will only be accessible to those with biometric digital ID. Almost as if it's something that's planned.
Pay insufficient attention to the frightening scenario of a comprehensive cyber attack, which would bring to a complete halt to the power supply, transportation, hospital services, our society as a whole. The COVID-19 crisis would be seen in this respect as a small disturbance in comparison to a major cyber attack.
All right, folks, he's telling you right there. There's no excuse. Here's a picture of the photo of you can't have a car, but look at this lineup of private jets here. All right. What John Kerry said, right? We select individuals. It's extraordinary.
And when you stop and think about it, it's pretty extraordinary that we, select group of human beings, because of whatever touched us at some point in our lives, are able to...
Whatever touched us at some point in our lives, I think we know what that was. Okay. And finish this part up here. Klaus Schwab, the founder and head of the WEF, is said to have a God complex and aims to run the organization until his death, like a pope or a monarch. How about that outfit? I still don't know what. Do you have any idea what that is? What that garb is right there?
No.
Let's just.
He's been photographed in that so much. It's all over the place.
Let's see if we can find out. What is the robe Klaus Schwab is wearing? I'll put what is the strange robe. It's probably got something to do with one of the universities or somewhere where he's been given an honorary degree, and that just happens to be what their vestments look like, what their their gown, whatever. Let's see.
It does look a lot like like something that one might wear if they're a part of the Galactic Federation of Light.
Right, the Galactic Federation of Light.
Yeah. That myth, fairy tale that goes around a lot.
Yeah, the New Age people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to look real quick and see if I can. Looks like Anakin Skywalker, one person says here. There's nothing more offensive and obscene than billionaires flying private jets. We've seen that. I don't guess anybody knows, man. I would assume that it's just right. It's just some kind of. I don't know. I don't know.
Someone in the chat says, "Have you seen Klaus's beachwear?"
No thanks. I haven't seen the beachwear. Chairman of the world. Nothing to see here, just a picture of the chairman of the world. There it is. The man who wrote the book called COVID-19, The Great Reset. Right? Can you believe? I'll show you in just a minute. There's an article from CNN where they're calling the Great Reset a conspiracy theory. Okay, moving right along here. Now, the World Economic Forum and Schwab, they've lashed out at disinformation campaigns against their tyrannical ideas. At the end of last year, end of 2022, they were labeling all of their critics agents of disinformation. Let's listen to this little clip here. I wonder what she's saying.
We are finding operation of a whole range of human rights that are playing out online, from freedom of speech to the freedom to, to be free from online violence, or the right of data protection to the right to child, where we have increasing polarization everywhere, and everything feels binary when it doesn't need to be. So I think we're going to have to think about a recalibration. We are finding operation of a
polarization, recalibration. All right, whatever. That's not the clip I was looking for, but wow, isn't that strange language? Recalibration, that's the reset. That's all that means. That's all that word means. Here's what we were looking for. Here's Schwab and Burla, CEO, Pfizer's CEO, whining about being targeted by disinformationists or something. I don't know. Let's see.
It's a very fanatic group of anti-vaxxers that will go after us no matter what. They will claim that the sun didn't go up because people were vaccinated, and that created issues with the crop.
Something the audio is cutting out on that thing.
Isn't that convenient?
Yeah.
COVID. Yeah. I think he got hundreds of thousands of clicks and so on. I know you will also target...
I read one day that was arrested by FBI.
Yeah, same happened to me.
And there are pictures of me and FBI officers.
That might be prophetic there. There's no way they're going to be arrested, but wouldn't it be nice?
I don't know how.
Yeah.
I never said. The surprising thing it is that the same publication, I found out because had published, the previous one that was arrested was the Pope by FBI. So, ridiculous,
oh no, really, but really.
These people.
Okay, and I just wanted to show you guys some of this from the World Economic Forum. See, I don't say World Economic Forum anymore. I don't give the respect. I just say War Economic Forum. That's what I say. War Economic Forum. It's just too hard to say. But here are the usual suspects. Here are the Board of Trustees. But what was interesting was this. Well, here's the youth. We're going to hear about the young global leaders from summer in just a moment. But here's what they say is important to the youth. Here's what they say is important to the youth. The youth apparently showed up at Davos. All the youth, and this is what they think. If you're a youth, well, this is what you think. 60 teenagers and youth made their voices heard and built relationships for intergenerational collaboration at Davos. They said that far more must be done to advance progress on youth priorities. Well, that's not always what kids think. We need more attention, more money. But from climate to inclusion, to give young people power over decisions that impact their futures. Sorry, kids, you're not going to be getting any power. You've been had. So artificial intelligence and inclusion, climate justice. Here you go. To reach global climate goals and stay within planetary boundaries. Let's see. Stay within planetary boundaries. There's a need for increased climate finance and philanthropy. The vast majority of funding, however, is pledged to Western initiatives led by what is perceived by many young people as elite stakeholders. The youth want to see a change. The two youths want to see a change. Well, I don't know, we've probably seen just about enough of this, haven't we? This chart shows global youth perspectives on climate change. I'm sure it does. Oh, it's the same article. What do you say to people when they hit you with this? You need to have, we've got a good link to share with you here. Are you a climate denier? They might ask. You could say, I'm a climate thinker. Climate is always changing. Sure, we have some influence over it. But human beings with plentiful energy, using more fossil fuels, could master virtually any climate. That's a fact. That's why, as CO2 levels have gone up, climate disaster deaths have plummeted. And it's true over the last, it's gone down like 100% over the last 30 or 40 years, I think it was. It's incredible. None of what they say is actually true. What about electric vehicles? What's your position on electric vehicles? Well, certainly. It's a valuable product for some people, but they're obviously not cost effective for the vast majority of us. Why don't we just let electric vehicles compete on the free market? Why does the government need to subsidize them? Why do we need to hike the prices on internal combustion engine cars and subsidize electric cars? Let them compete on the open market. Don't pressure people. What about solar and wind? What do you think about solar and wind? Solar and wind should be required to compete on a real market. In the context of electricity, that means generators using solar and wind should be held to the same reliability standards as all other forms of energy. Currently, they're not. That's a disaster. So anyway, that's if you want to go to energytalkingpoints.com. That's Alex Epstein's website. You'll have plenty of resources there to learn how to refute all of this stuff as it comes at you. Climate change and disinformation, how to combat it, here on this website. This is a link off of the World Economic Forum's website to annualreviews.org. What drivers of climate skepticism? They say it's about worldview. Isn't that interesting? They're over here preaching a religion. They're telling you that it's about worldviews. The most important variables are people's personal worldviews and elite cues. What are the elite saying? Dealing with climate change will require a transformation of the global economy. So says the World Economic Forum. Although numerous instruments for climate mitigation exist, the required cuts to CO2 emissions cannot be achieved without some new policies or regulations. Mitigation, therefore, presents a deep challenge to people whose personal identity and worldviews are tied up with free market economics. You've got to get people thinking differently, they say. Countless surveys, they say, have shown a strong association between right-wing or libertarian worldviews and the rejection of climate science. There it is. This is a battle, folks. It's a battle for your mind. It's epistemology. Metaphysics and epistemology. Epistemology is, how do you know what you know? Spiritual warfare and the life of the mind. Anti-elitism and conspiracism, right? The elite are constructed differently in different contexts and often include established institutions such as mainstream media, the judiciary, and academics and experts. Climate denial has therefore become a pervasive attribute of many, though not all, populist movements. It goes on, this thing. It says the role of the elites, worldviews, populism, and conspiratorial rhetoric do not occur in a vacuum. Instead, these variables take effect in political and rhetorical context that is shaped by the media and by political cultural elites. That's ridiculous, because it's as if they're saying here that the media doesn't support their message. It goes on here. There's another one here I thought you might want to see that's interesting. Organized disinformation. Here it is. Rhetorical strategies employed by climate disinformation have been curated by public relations professionals. Right? There it is. In other words, our movement is so convincing and persuasive. The science is so clear that we had to get public relations professionals to make you trust it, right? So they say what happens is these disinformation undermines and questions the scientific consensus. The consensus highlights scientific uncertainty and demand certainty as a condition for climate action. Demanding certainty. They say it's not right for you to demand certainty in the science they promote while they tell you that their science is certain. Strange. Undermining institutions such as peer review. The fact is peer review is not reliable any longer. Project pseudoscientific alternatives through a network of blogs. Right? In other words, if it's not coming from us, it's not the truth. Anyway, here's how you can communicate. Here's how you can get the climate message across in an adversarial environment. Right? You must take care to select the right tools to operate. Acknowledge and use the nuance of emotion, but avoid fear. Look, man, if your movement is really crucial, everybody's going to know it. You're not going to have to convince people. Affirm the science through culturally appropriate messages and by highlighting the scientific consensus. I got to see what they mean by a culturally appropriate message. Here it is. Messages that are designed to align with an individual's cultural frame of reference. For example, when messages emphasize free market solutions to climate change, acceptance of the science increases among conservatives. So when you lie to conservatives and tell them that they're going to make money, they start to believe you. When stories are created that contain heroes and villains, the Libertarian Cato Institute versus the Egalitarian Club of Rome. See, look at that. That's right there in the document, right here on the website itself. It says the Egalitarian Club of Rome. Both can be hero or villain depending on people's worldview. The extent of positive effect for the hero predicted outcome, measures such as perceived risk from climate change or policy preferences. For example, people's effect for the Cato Institute predicted their endorsement of cap and trade. Anyway, whatever. This is boring. Here's how to counter disinformation. You have to, something they call inoculation. Pre-bunking. Remember that one? Mm-hmm. Pre-bunking is often helpful. Pre-bunking, right? That's an idea of inoculation involves two elements. First, an explicit warning of an impending disinformation attempt, and the second, a refutation of an anticipated argument that exposes its fallacy. To illustrate one study applied, inoculation to climate change by presenting participants with a warning that political operatives often attempt to cast doubt on the scientific consensus.
Well, you know, this is just a little comedic moment, but you know, they do say that the devil is in the details, and this is a good example of that.
Yeah, the devil has written this.
just this mumbo jumbo.
A detailed explanation of the dissenting fake experts.
Yeah.
Anybody who doesn't accept what they call the consensus is fake. Isn't that funny? Isn't that funny? Well, folks, we've come around now to that point in the show where we want to get around to telling you about this young global leaders group. And let's see. Yeah, let's play this clip for you here, and they'll set up Summer for what she has to present to you tonight.
I have met practically every leader in the last 40 years. And there were only 3 or 4 leaders who really made a lasting impression on me and to a certain extent changed my thinking. And one of those was Mandela, another one was my teacher at Harvard 50 years ago, Professor Henry Kissinger.
He had a massive impact on Schwab's overarching ideology in the future. And that was partially because Kissinger was mixed up within a lot of groups, including very much the Rockefellers.
And you mentioned, David, Henry Kissinger. Actually, I guess I was the first one who got to know him because he was a member of an organization called the Council on Foreign Relations in New York.
Now, Henry Kissinger himself, of course, the point man for the Club of Rome and for the ideology of population reduction. The Club of Rome was set up in 1968 by Aurelio Pecci, who was an Italian industrialist, and Alexander King, who was a Scottish chemist.
The Club of Rome comprises some 70 men of widely varying backgrounds, but their common concern is that the world problems cannot be solved by individual nations. I spoke with Dr. Aurelio Pecci, founder of the club, and Dr. Alexander King, director of the World Bank and the United Nations OECD.
They really concentrated on population control, on bringing down the population. They had Malthusian ideas.
It's not some science fantasy effect from 2001. This electronic display emanating from Australia's largest computer is a picture of the condition, past, present and future of planet Earth. It was developed under the auspices of the Club of Rome by an MIT research team to present a complex model of the world and what we humans are doing to it.
Yeah.
What it does for the first time in man's history on the planet is to look at the world as one system. It shows that Earth cannot sustain present population and industrial growth for much more than a few decades. It shows that simply cleaning up our car exhausts and making some small effort to limit our families simply isn't enough. The condition of the planet starts to become highly critical. And
remember, the message here from the Club of Rome is the enemy of humanity is man.
Don't do anything about it, this is what's going to happen. The quality of life is going to go right back to practically zero. Pollution is going to become so serious, right out here, that it will start to kill people.
This Malthusian idea would go along with the introduction of the World Economic Forum.
Damen und Herren, herzlich willkommen hier in Davos.
The world has become so interdependent that entrepreneurs everywhere in the world depend each on another.
I think he's very much the top frontman of the ideology of the Rockefeller's Club of Rome, Henry Kissinger. They needed someone in Europe who had experience with trying to bring people together, bring companies together. Klaus Schwab would say, you know, we have to really, really harness that human capital. And it's very much a sign that they were on the same wavelength as all of the people who had taught him, all the people who had brought them up, and the Club of Rome, and the people who were saying that we need population.
I'll cut in right here for just a second. It's true what Johnny says there, that Klaus Schwab's message is we have to harness that human capital. And his mentor here, Heinz Kissinger, you know, he has the same perspective on that. We have to harness that human capital. Now, that's a terribly derogatory term, human capital. Right? You're a unit to be measured and used. And what was Henry Kissinger's famous quote or term of endearment for the people, right? He's the one that coined the term useless eaters. It's what he thinks. And cannon fodder, he said the same thing about the soldiers in Vietnam, the ones that were used there. They're just units in a techno war where the war is managed like a production facility. You have to push this many men out there to get killed, to take the hits. And when he's talking about the population, the term useless eaters, this is what these guys think.
All the people who have brought them up, and the Club of Rome, and the people who were saying that we need population control if we're going to have success in the future. I think they saw him, Klaus Schwab, as the perfect person to take on their cause and rebrand their cause as something which was environmental rather than population control.
We have continuous partnerships with many governments around the world. And of course we have NGOs, we have trade unions, we have all those different parts. Media, of course. Right? And very important experts and scientists and academia. Because if we are looking at the future, I think we should look at new solutions, and the new solutions will be very much driven by technological development.
Eugenics is a hard thing to spin after World War II. The Malthusian idea of needing a disaster to create their agenda is really important. We could create disasters, or we could create, even if they're not real, we can create them to make sure that our agenda is pushed forward.
Welcome to the...
Indeed. There it is. Okay. Summer?
Yes.
You're up.
Thanks for setting me up there. Yeah, we're definitely in the war for knowledge. You know, there's a war on knowledge that's going on information. Thinking about Unstoppable Us and what Harari's doing targeting the children. And we did a show about Gaggle recently about the surveillance technology that's in the schools, aka the social credit system ultimately. But anyway, like honing in on what our audience knows already, because we've talked a lot about it, the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leaders Initiative has long been on the radar here at AOT and is responsible for seeding many of the elite, the ruling elite, into positions of power and influence within the world's business, civil society, and in politics. So we've seen that. Justin Trudeau, Putin, Lucien, the WEF's supposed mastermind of the project that we've been hearing about all along, lifetime leader Klaus Schwab, had himself already been helped into his own influential position by a very similar program run out of Harvard University that is heavily funded by the CIA. So investigative journalists that you've just seen there, Johnny Vedmore, researched the people behind the Young Global Leaders Program, which leads to, as we've seen, Henry Kissinger's International Seminar. So it's widely known actually as Kissinger's International Seminar, but it actually goes back a step, but we'll get into that in a second. So the CIA conduits, which funded the program, and Kissinger's key role in the creation of the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leaders Program itself. So these are the connections in this CIA-Harvard University nexus of the late 1940s and early 1950s came the formation of what would be called a generation later, the World Economic Forum. Okay? So in a nutshell, where connections intersect is that the CIA, MI5, MI6 had all had an official liaison with Yandell Elliott, which is actually the person that is behind Kissinger's movement. So Kissinger's International Seminar was actually, there was a guy behind Kissinger who was his mentor, and that's Yandell Elliott. So there was a liaison between Yandell Elliott and Kissinger, and all these ties move in with also Klaus Schwab, because Schwab would then follow and be mentored by Kissinger. So
at Harvard.
Yes, at Harvard.
Are you going to get to the funding?
You can get into the funding if you want.
Well, it's just one comment. I'll find the link up here too. But this was that organization that Henry Kissinger provided. Mm-hmm. That Schwab was a part of, was funded by the CIA.
Correct.
So Klaus Schwab gets his start as a globalist under the funding of the CIA. Now, you can say we're crazy and we're out here peddling conspiracy theories, but the facts are the facts. And that's very strange.
Yeah.
Continue.
So, Klaus Schwab became the heir of Henry Kissinger's most important project, the infiltration of individuals and organizations in countries around the world with the aim of creating globalist-aligned governments. Shocker. Klaus Schwab's activities since his time at Harvard can be seen as simply a direct continuation of Kissinger's work during the 1950s and 60s. And it would be naive of us to believe that there is not someone else already groomed and trained who is ready and willing to pick up Kissinger's political baton from Schwab and continue their joint mission toward globalist governance. So there's somebody that's trained up that's going to, when Schwab steps down or passes away, who's clearly been trained up. The history of the Young Global Leaders Program actually is this. William Yandell Elliott, he was with the Harvard Summer School, so he's the one that spearheaded this International Seminar Forum. So it was called originally the International Seminar Forum. And Yandell was the brainchild of this, and he was a professor of history and political science at Harvard University for 38 years, and he was a former advisor to government agencies. So, by the way, the Harvard Summer School is the oldest academic summer program in the U.S., founded in 1871. It's still active today.
Here is that, let me blow this up on the screen for the folks. Here's that.
There's the equivalent number there.
1.6 million equivalent. Here's that point we're making, that the CIA International Seminar that Summers just introduced was later boosted by extra funding, 135 grand, which would be 1.6 million today, by the Central Intelligence Agency between 1960 and 1966, the times when Herr Schwab would be there. With any previous CIA funding since the seminar's creation in 1950 being left undeclared. So here's Harvard Summer School's International Seminar Forum had originally been brainchild of, there's William Yandell Elliott. Go ahead, Sam.
Yes. So, just to give you sort of a timeline, the Harvard Summer School had been running for over 75 years by the time Henry Kissinger was finishing his studies at the university. So just to kind of give you a little bit of a timeline, in 1951, Kissinger launched the Harvard magazine called Confluence, which was to run alongside with the International Seminar, Kissinger's International Seminar. And this magazine was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation.
Yeah, isn't that nice? Isn't that interesting how you can't, anything that's going on in the world today that looks like it's moving toward a one world system or anything that looks bad, it seems like it always funnels down to a Rockefeller, a Rothschild, and there's a lot of other elite family names that no one knows. But these are the ones that seem to...
There's one more funneling. It's the Harvard initiative in question, often referred to as Henry Kissinger's International Seminar, was one of several programs set up by senior members of organizations such as the Council on Foreign Relations and the newly created CIA.
So, yeah, it says here Kissinger had a finger in everything when he was U.S. Secretary of State, which he was several times. Managing the foreign affairs file of the world's preeminent superpower. He was quoted once as saying, "There cannot be a crisis this week. My schedule is already full." How about that? He's a busy guy, right? He doesn't have time for a crisis this week.
Yeah, so how about that? The World Economic Forum's Young Global Leaders program actually was the International Seminar Forum, which started up in 1951, running through Harvard and funded by CIA.
There you go. Thanks to Johnny Vedmore for that. Philosophically, if some of you folks out there who might be interested in points like these, now Kissinger is a globalist. There's no question about it. And now you can see what kind of globalist he is in what Schwab and the Forum are trying to do today. As I stated right at the top of the show in that opening piece, that it was Klaus Schwab said that one of the top 3 influences in his whole life was Henry Kissinger. So that tells you that inside the American government for decades now has existed an element that has always been pushing us to this moment. Your freedom has been
always pushing
dying.
us to this worldview.
Yeah. Kissinger is described as a Kantian idealist. He sought to identify the United States with rather than against the post-colonial revolutions following World War II. But Kissinger understood there was a clear conflict between 2 moral imperatives in foreign policy: the obligation to defend freedom and the necessity for coexisting with adversaries. So these are good articles, folks. So let's show you once again here this is a document that's may or may not be available on the internet or openly anyway. Johnny has done a good job of tracking these documents down, and because they're usually available on the Wayback Machine, it's hard to get them off of there. But as you go to our website, armoroftruth.net, you'll see right here the unauthorized history of the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leaders. Read through here. Hey, visit that donate tab while you're at it. That helps us out a lot. Help us to continue to bring you these reports. And then click that link and go to where the article is here on Unlimited Hangout. It's actually Whitney Webb's website, but you can see here all of these articles, all of the primary documents are linked here for you. And it's quite a good job these folks have done over here. All right, is that all you've got for us?
Yeah, that's the gist of it.
That was it was good because it was.
Good evening,
it was
everyone.
Brief. No.
Thank you very much.
Excuse me. This is my show. What do you All right. Yeah, that brings us down to the end here. Check this out.
We're in a crisis of compassion. So for the first time in my career, doctors are turning their shoulders away from patients. I
remember when we're talking about pandemic issues, as we told you recently in a show here recently, the whole thing, at least in the United States, was run out of the Department of Defense as a military operation. This is why the jabs, they're not medicines, they're called countermeasures. This is why they didn't have to be tested. They didn't have to go through any safety protocols at all, because the government didn't order safety protocols. They ordered military countermeasures. DARPA has been involved in the COVID-19 response. DARPA's stated mission, is that they create revolutionary military technology, weapons. That's what they do. Sometimes the things they create coincide and give us something new that we can use, like GPS. Something we can use, they'll also be used against us. So that's why this is relevant.
Are denying patients care. So this is very, very important.
What does that mean? They're killing them.
They're killing
right?
them. They're killing them.
Dr. Peter McCullough is an internist and cardiologist from Dallas, Texas. He has a long and fairly famed history in medicine, which you can look up if you like, and you should. But more to the point, he has treated COVID a lot.
The scorecard for an academic doctor is the number of citations listed in the National Library of Medicine. I have over 600 citations in the National Library of Medicine. I'm considered the most published person in my field in the world in history. I've chaired and participated on more data safety monitoring boards for drug trials, for device and interventional trials. I've been the overall global principal investigator of studies. I've given presentations before the US FDA, the New York Academy of Sciences, the European Medicines Agency, and I can tell you as a doctor who sees patients with COVID-19 and treats them, I have 40 publications on COVID-19. I am supremely qualified to give my opinions on this crisis. In fact, more qualified than any other individual in the world. There's no one who has that convergence of experience face-to-face with the virus. What's gone on over time is a complete and total program to focus on everything else other than the sick patient. Doctors' eyes became clouded, their hearts became hardened, and they didn't offer the treatment to patients. So initially, there is a complete and total focus on what's called contagion control. Wearing masks, social distancing, hand sanitizers, lockdown, playing defense. Then the next move, some information about how to treat patients in the hospital, a few updates here and there, controversies regarding the drugs. The approaches in the hospital become clear that they're too late, and virtually all the deaths occur in the hospital. The hospital doesn't save the patients. So this concept of playing defense with contagion control and waiting for the hospitalization becomes very apparent, literally within a few months, that this isn't working. We're going to have millions and millions of hospitalizations. We're going to have hundreds of thousands of deaths in the United States with this strategy. Then everything comes into focus. Play defense with contagion control, hospital, allow the deaths to basically happen because we haven't treated the virus early, and then it becomes clear what the game plan is. Wait for mass vaccination. So there became an understanding on my side of things that somehow my work was caught up in a very high stakes game. And a big part of this game was the suppression of any information on treatment to patients whatsoever. And so once it became known that the plan was mass vaccination, all efforts on treatment were dropped.
I have met practically every...
Scary stuff. And so recently at the Davos 2023, former CNN anchor or host Brian Stelter showed up there. Let me get back here to this little piece for you, which is really interesting that Brian Stelter would show up there to give a panel discussion on misinformation or disinformation, I think they call it. So to have someone like Brian Stelter there to host a panel discussion on disinformation, that shows you one of two things is happening. These people are completely, they lack self-awareness. They have no idea what it looks like. Or, I mean, if they ever were to come up with some scientific way to measure how dumb a move could be, then that would be a very dumb move. However, maybe it's not dumb. Maybe they're not stupid. So what else might be happening? If they're not dumb, which we've pointed out to you here tonight, Klaus Schwab is anything but dumb. He might not be wise. We could say that. He doesn't show a lot of wisdom. He doesn't show any wisdom, in fact. But he is very, very smart. I'll share a piece from Doug Wilson here with you. The meaning of misinformation when average people hear the word, well, we assume that someone's making a claim about reality. The way things are in the world. That's how most people think, because most people hold a common sense correspondence theory of truth. A thing cannot be, A cannot be non-A at the same time and in the same way. In the same sense, at the same time. A thing can't be itself and something else at the same time. That's the correspondence theory of truth. Meaning that if someone says it's raining outside and you go look out the window and you see nothing but bright sunshine, then you have the right to say that person is wrong. Someone tells you that we've only got a few years left to live here on the planet because of man-made climate change, or that you can't drive a car anymore because of this or that. You have the right to check it out, and if they're wrong, you can say they're wrong. But if it's a bigger issue, one with political ramifications, you might say somebody's purveying misinformation. Isn't it interesting that the very thing that these elites are so bothered by, the thing that they war against so much, disinformation, is exactly what they do. It's all they have. This idea that in order to be true, statements have to conform to the state of affairs that they're pointing to in the world. In other words, the verbal statement needs to conform to the facts in order to avoid being misinformation. That's typically how it's always been thought of. It's a good statement of what ought to be used to evaluate truth and falsehood, but it shows up as quite naive about what's actually being done to us. For some decades now, hidden in the prestigious universities, certain termites, I'll give it to you the way Doug Wilson said it. For some decades now, tucked away in the floor joists underneath obscure departments in prestigious universities, certain termites, postmodernism, relativism, subjectivism, and other forms of goo thought have been industriously eating away at all such notions of objectivity. But the mistake of some critics who have seen this happening has been to think that the ultimate goal of said termites is simply the destruction of truth as such, after which the building falls down. But it's not just that. They're not just destroying truth. Something else is actually happening. This movement, these elites, and all those who serve their movement want to replace the floor joists with something else. They want to replace it with their own supporting structure. They want to redefine reality. It may appear that they want the anarchy of a free fall, but that is a mistake to think. They want to replace the structure, the supporting floor joists of facts with the supporting structure of narrative. It's no longer the ministry of truth, my friends. It's just the ministry of the narrative. And so one thing has remained constant. Misinformation continues to be a failure to conform. Right? That's what it means today. It has nothing to do with the truth. Typically, misinformation or disinformation meant that what someone was saying did not line up with reality. Today, it simply means that you're not conforming. If you don't conform, whatever you say is misinformation. But in the olden days, it was a failure to conform to the way things actually were. Now it's a failure to conform to the narrative. The fact that the narrative can change overnight, well, it can, but that's neither here nor there. As George Orwell put it in 1984, the past was alterable. The past never had been altered. Oceania was at war with East Asia. Oceania had always been at war with East Asia. The replacement of the facts with narrative is an essential feature of totalitarianism. The fact that it is currently being crammed down our throats is the central indication that we are being prepared for the totalitarian moment. Such a totalitarian moment can be identified when these two things are present. The first is a sophistical disregard for the objectivity of truth, particularly the revealed truth from God. And the second is that we see a fundamentalist zeal when it comes to the enforcement of the current narrative. When those two things are present together, this disregard for the objectivity of truth and that fundamentalist zeal to enforce the current narrative, you see those two things present together, you can rest assured that you are in the middle of a humanist power play. The fact that it is so erratic does not keep it from being mandatory. Do you doubt what I say? We live in a time that does not believe in any kind of transcendent truth at all. We're on our own. Dust in the wind, motes in the sunbeam, plastic cups on a river in a flood. And at the same time, and not unrelated, the enforcement mechanisms regarding various aspects of the dominant narrative have been ruthless and savage. Now, let's talk about our brothers, our fellow professing Christians. Are you surrounded by a live and let live attitude when it comes to vaccines, when it comes to masks and lockdowns? Are you surrounded by a live and let live attitude when it comes to Pride Month or wokeness or critical theory or indigenous peoples or patriarchy or whiteness? To ask the question is to answer it. The current narrative, whatever it is, will be enforced with a club, the kind of club that has spikes coming out of it. There's no such thing as truth, but the narrative will be enforced as though Thomas de Torquemada had been made director of the Ministry of Truth, thumbscrews and all. Doug's a good writer. He's a lot better than me. And so whenever you're dealing with some ministry of truth or other, always remember that you're actually dealing with a ministry of the narrative. The phrase useful idiot has been attributed to Lenin, but it can't really be confirmed. Nevertheless, whether or not he said it, he should have, that kind of person played into his success, and they were all around him. The common usage of the phrase useful idiot today applies in many situations and refers to someone like a patsy who is cunningly used by some ruthless power broker higher up. Brian Stelter, the former CNN host, does not appear to be the sharpest knife in the drawer, and yet there he is. leading a panel discussion at Davos. Let's make sure we have a picture of him at Davos. He's not the sharpest knife in the drawer, he says. There he is. Oh boy. Elite nodding their heads all over the room in agreement as he sits there being used. It's an ancient tactic, right? The useful idiot. When certain syncretistic agents of compromise were establishing their mash-up religion back in old Israel, what did they do back then? 2 Kings 17. 32. Oh boy, I didn't put that one in there. Here we go. 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 32. So they feared the Lord and made unto themselves the lowest of them priests of the high places, which sacrificed for them in the houses of the high places. Low priests, the high places. There you go. That's how you do it, right? Unfortunately, the Christian world has supplied these behind-the-scenes leftists with an almost endless supply of these useful idiots also, just like this one. Many of us have been behaving just like this one. We have been a veritable seminary for such low priests, nurtured as they have been on a deracinated Christian faith that applies a truncated gospel to the minimal task of getting their white littler hinder parts into heaven. They then have to fill out the content of the rest of their thinking from other sources. So for the remainder of their worldview, they depend upon what they can pick up from NPR or CNN, uplifting quotes on their Starbucks cups, and casual conversations with the cashiers at Trader Joe's. The end result is a soggy, sad bag of bromides that is subbed in for thinking. Subbed in for thinking like an educated Christian. Even if they don't call it woke, they're being wokenized, which is kind of like being tenderized by one of those meat mallets. When the treatment is over, you're constantly aware of how any true statement you might make could be misunderstood by somebody else and how it could possibly hurt their feelings. And at the mention of somebody's feelings, a bailiff comes out of that little door on the side and cries, "All rise." So even when such Christians are not woke themselves, they are not at all aware of the crucial differences between the facts and the narrative, or the radical changes in the editorial staff of our official dictionaries that have taken place in the last few years, or just how off-putting being winsome actually is. There is no 11th commandment, my friends. We're not commanded to be nice. We're commanded to love. Sometimes that's hard. 2 Kings chapter 17. In 2 Kings 15, we hear of Hoshea, the man who led a conspiracy against Pekah, the king of Israel. After the successful assassination, Hoshea took the throne and started his own brief dynasty. And you thought we had problems with our electoral system? Hoshea was an evil man, but by no means the worst of the kings of Israel. And so this reminds us that that judgment to a nation might not come while it's at the height of its sin. When God judges a nation or a culture, he has the big picture in view. And for that reason, the actual events of judgment may come when things are not as bad in a relative sense. And so this king is much like our current American president. He was emasculated, owned, and ruled by foreign forces. Like Hosea, our president the resident of the White House, has accepted the status of vassal to the kings of the global empire. If Hosea did what he was supposed to do, paid his money, and did as the king of Assyria demanded, he would be allowed to remain in office and appear as if he was in charge, just like our leaders. Hosea did not look for the Lord to help. He looked to Egypt, as our leaders look to the global tyrants who own them. This was a long, dedicated campaign to finally crush the rebellious kingdom of Israel who had defied the power of the Assyrian Empire. Even though it took a 3-year siege, it was worth it to the Assyrians. Just like the global elites today, they're playing the long game. They are patient to conquer fully. This shows us that when God brings his judgment, he uses human instruments to do it quite often. Klaus Schwab is an instrument of the sovereign God. How about that? When the northern kingdom was conquered, the Assyrians implemented their policy toward conquered nations. They implemented their Great Reset. They deported all but the very lowest classes back to the key cities of their empire, either to train and utilize the talented or to enslave the able. 200 years and 19 kings after Solomon, the last king over a united Israel, the northern kingdom of Israel fell. It wasn't because the God of Israel was unable to help them, but because they had so forsaken God and ignored his guidance and correction that he finally stopped actively protecting them and let them rot and degrade according to their desire. 200 years and 19 kings is how long it took for Israel to implode. As of July 4th, 2022, the United States is 246 years old and has seen 46 presidents. That's a long run for any nation on average. Therefore, we might say we're overdue. What we ought to say and recognize is how gracious God has been to us for a very long time. The Assyrian rulers followed their typical customs toward a defeated nation: depopulation, exile, leading the captives away on journeys. In this case of Israel, the captives were led hundreds of miles, naked, attached together with a system of strings and fish hooks pierced through their lower lips. God was going to make sure that they were humiliated, led through the broken walls of their own conquered cities. This is qualified in Amos chapter 4, verses 2 and 3. The Lord God has sworn by his holiness, behold, the days are coming upon you when they will take you away with meat hooks, and the last of you with fish hooks. And you will go out through breaches in the walls, each one straight before her. And you will be cast to Harmon, declares the Lord. This shows another principle of God's judgment. When it comes, it's often humiliating and degrading. It's a very important principle here to lay down. Those who are in Christ, those who belong to God today in this new covenant, we get discipline. We get discipline and correction. Those who are not get judgment. So the rest of this chapter, 2 Kings chapter 17, is spent vindicating the divine providence and justice, showing the reason why God permitted such a desolation to fall on His chosen people. Why? First of all, they disregarded the God of their redemption. The fundamental reason was a problem with sin. It wasn't geopolitical changes or social causes. The problem was and is sin. They had feared and served other gods. They had every warning they needed. And they had the truth revealed to them through the prophets. And still they wandered. Rather purposefully, they wandered from God and turned their backs on the safety of obedience to God. Israel had been serving other gods for about 200 years up to this point. So this shows us another principle of God's judgment. God is merciful. He's long-suffering and patient. God holds back His judgment as long as possible. The next reason that they fell, they conformed themselves to the godless nations around them. Have we done that? God's judgment was not against the ancient Canaanites because of their race or their ethnicity. They were judged because of their conduct. They weren't judged because of who they were judged because of what they did. Today, God isn't concerned about who you are. He's concerned about what you do. As Israel shared in the same conduct, they would share the same judgment. They made idols just like the pagans, and they also took up the same laws and practices. Men make both their laws and their idols after their own ingenuity and desire. Another reason that the northern kingdom fell, because they secretly and openly practiced idolatry. We see in verse 12, rebellion and sin cloud the judgment of men. And clearly the judgment of Israel was affected. Their judgment was impaired enough to think that they could sin secretly against a God who sees everything. They built for themselves high places in all their cities. These were places of unauthorized worship, idolatrous sacrifice. The same sins that brought judgment upon the Canaanites also brought judgment on the northern kingdom of Israel. Another reason that the northern kingdom fell. They rejected the repeated warnings of God. In love, God sent prophets for hundreds of years to the northern and southern kingdoms. The prophets warned against the sins that corrupted the people and separated them from God. The message of invitation that God sent through the prophets was turn from your evil ways. And the message that Jesus brought, repent, the kingdom of God is at hand. Nevertheless, they wouldn't hear it, and neither have our nation. Israel didn't soften when God called them to repentance, even though the prophets came. Instead, they doubled down. They hardened their hearts, and they became more stubborn, and they sank deeper into sin. They followed idols. They became idolaters. The way the NIV translates this section, it says they followed worthless idols and themselves became worthless. The NASB has it. They followed vanity and became vain. One theologian said The original is more accurate at this point. They worshipped emptiness and became empty. The word here, the Hebrew word here, it means err. It means delusion or vanity. The idea is that they became like the gods they worshipped. They bowed down to nothingness and they became nothing. You become like that which you worship. That is a tried and true, solid, eternal principle. When God brings judgment, He always brings warning. Well, our examples of His judgment shows that He has brought warning before. He doesn't have to. When Christ comes to judge, there'll be no warning. Well, you've been warned. Often, many warnings over a long period of time are given. It's only after these warnings are rejected that the judgment comes. As always, as with the world today, the sin was first against law, but finally it was against God's patient love. And another reason that the northern kingdom fell, they forgot God and served idols until judgment finally came. This part of the passage refers to the infamous sin of Jeroboam in 1 Kings chapter 12. Folks, this was state-sponsored idolatry. This was where the government mandated it. Very much like our situation today. The sin did not immediately ruin the kingdom. The northern kingdom of Israel lasted as an independent nation for another 200 years, a lot like America. Yet it certainly was the beginning of the end. Where do you think we are today, according to God's patience? Hasn't He been patient? This nation that was so blessed to be peaceful, prosperous, quiet for so long, hasn't He been very patient with such a once blessed and now rebellious bunch as we are? So much is similar to our world today. For example, with our sanitizing and justifying of abortion. It says here in the passage in 2 Kings, and they caused their sons and daughters to pass through the fire. This refers to the abominable worship of the idol Molech, to whom children were offered, were burned and sacrificed. Well, we, today, in the United States alone, almost 1 million babies every year in America alone destroyed. Nearly 80 million abortions a year worldwide. And yet no concern from the leaders, little to no protest from the people, but praise God for the few who do stand up against this which is, without a doubt, the worst genocide in all of history. It's touched us all. God is merciful, after all. They also practiced witchcraft and soothsaying. The northern tribes embraced the same occult practices as the Canaanite tribes before them had embraced. Collectively, these great sins of idolatry provoked God to anger. What about us? How about Hollywood? How about pop music? Entertainment in general? Many forms of occultism are normalized in our world today. How about the worship of the planet, which is the major religion, global religion forming in the world today? Even after all of this, it would be a mistake to think of the 10 northern tribes as lost. The legitimate priests and Levites, there were some left. God always leaves a remnant of true believers. And those who lived in the northern 10 tribes didn't like Jeroboam's idolatry. They, along with others who set their hearts to seek the Lord God, then moved from the northern kingdom of Israel to the southern kingdom of Judah, 2 Chronicles 11. So actually, the southern kingdom of Judah contained Israelites from all of the 10 tribes. God will sovereignly preserve his remnant. For us today, that means he will sovereignly preserve his church, even if it seems like every church in your town has become a word faith or something that's not true. God will preserve his remnant. Some migrated to the southern kingdom of Judah in the days of Jeroboam the first. Some assimilated into other cultures. Some kept their Jewish culture and identity in the lands of their exile. In a spiritual sense, Judah was more faithful than the northern kingdom, but they too eventually began to imitate their sinful neighbors. Judah had the lesson right in front of them, just like we do. They saw firsthand what happened when hardened hearts turned from God, but they ignored the lesson and imitated the same sins. So the summary of Israel's sin is simply that they were given over to idolatry. They worshiped the true God in a false way, and then began to also worship false gods. The nameless, corrupt priest of Assyria taught the captives a corrupt religion. And that's what the World Economic Forum and other global leaders today are doing. They're teaching the world a new corrupt religion. With it has elements of the true faith in it, but at the same time, it's corrupted by state-sponsored idolatry. They feared the Lord, yet they served their own gods. This described the pagan peoples that the Assyrians brought in to populate the area of the northern kingdom of Israel. They gave a measure of respect to the God of Israel. They acknowledged that he existed, yet they also served their own gods and picked and chose among religious and spiritual beliefs as it pleased them. In other words, the lesson we see from Israel here is interfaith. They gave a measure of respect to God, but they also served their own gods and picked and chose among religious and spiritual beliefs as it pleased them. The house of one, where Islam, Judaism, and Christianity come and worship together. Worship what? This accurately described the pagan peoples who repopulated Israel. This accurately describes the northern kingdom of Israel before they were conquered and exiled. This accurately describes common religious beliefs in our modern world. One theologian wrote as a charge to modern man, quote, "Are you sure this is not a true description of your own position? You pay outward deference to God by attending his house and acknowledging his day, while you're really prostrating yourself before other shrines," unquote. Charles Spurgeon charged, "Is not worldly faith or faithful worldliness the current religion of the world? They live among godly people, and God chastens them, and therefore they fear him, but not enough to give their hearts to him. With itching ears, they seek out teachers to suit their own passions, and they settle down comfortably to corrupt faith, half-truth, half-error, and corrupt worship, half-dead form, and half-dead orthodoxy." Spurgeon also wrote, "Let me be right, and let there be no mistake about it. But do not let me try to be both right and wrong, washed and filthy, a child of God and a child of Satan. Let me be right, and let there be no mistake about it." To this day, they continue practicing the former rituals, it says in 2 Kings 17:41. This mixed religion, first promoted by the Assyrians, continued for many centuries, and it continued even into New Testament times. It seems that God was more than lenient with these people and their corrupt belief. In fact, he was more lenient with the Samaritans than he was with disobedient Israel. This teaches us another principle about God's judgment. It teaches us that those who have more revelation from God are held to stricter account before him. Don't be many teachers. Don't many of you be teachers, because you're held to a higher account. Those who have more revelation, those who know more, are held to a higher account. 2 Chronicles 30 shows us that in the days of King Hezekiah of Judah, there were some worshipers of the true God among the area. That was formerly the northern kingdom of Israel. But the Lord your God you shall fear, and he will deliver you from the hand of all your enemies. God gave us this account to remind us that if Israel had been faithful, even a little bit, even moderately faithful, they would still stand. God would have delivered them from all their enemies. Instead, they were conquered by the Assyrian Empire after their own self-destruction in sin and rebellion. So this is a fresh perspective we hope we've given you on the New World Order, globalist tyrants, false churches, and false prophets. They can't win. They won't win. So our duty, our focus needs to be on faithfulness. God provides a place for these pretenders to go. Like The Chosen, for example, the TV show. Like all the false churches that you see in your town, in your area. It's not like they're getting away with something. They're not believers. God has provided these outlets so that the true and believing church won't be overrun by goats. And also, too many truthers, podcasters, pundits, and pretty personalities are eager to come to your screen and sensationalize all the evil in the world. They want to explain how 6 corporations control the media, control the narrative, and therefore shape the thinking and emotions of the greater portion of society. And they would be right. That is true. There's value in knowing that. But what most people are doing to you today, or to people who are seeking out the truth online or on YouTube, most of the people out there providing this content today are capitalizing on the drama, knowing that they wouldn't even exist without the constant stream of new things and hot takes and their daily dose of truther feed. Right? They're collecting information, but never really learning anything, never growing in the faith. 2 Timothy chapter 3. But know this, that in the last days, perilous times will come. Last days. It's a broad term in the New Testament. You could say that the last days began with the birth of the church on the day of Pentecost. The days of the Messiah mark the last days, but the term is especially appropriate to the season immediately before the return of Jesus and the consummation of all things. And there are some that think that paying attention to the last days or biblical prophecy is frivolous. That it will surely be obvious and plain to see when the last days are upon us, or at least when world conditions are like the Bible described they would be in the last days. But in Matthew 16, Jesus rebuked the religious leaders of his day because they did not or would not understand the meaning of their own times. Hypocrites! You know how to discern the face of the sky, but you cannot discern the signs of the times. It's possible that Jesus would have the same rebuke for some Christians today who are unaware of the last days and the soon return of Jesus Christ. This 2 Timothy chapter 3 tells us about perilous times. The word there suggests the kind of troubles, difficulty, stressful situations and atmosphere that will mark the last days. So it means very serious times. The word means hard to bear, troublesome, dangerous, harsh, fierce, and savage. John Stott writes, the word was used in classical Greek both of dangerous wild animals and of the raging sea. So that's not calm. The only other New Testament occurrence of this word, to help us understand what kind of times we're looking for, is when it's used in Matthew 8:28, in the story of the two Gadarene demoniacs who were as savage and untamed as wild beasts. Matthew described them as so fierce that no one could even pass by them. The characteristics Paul describes here suggest not just bad times, but bad people. John Calvin said of this passage, we should note what the hardness or danger of this time is in Paul's view. It's not war, not famine, not diseases, nor any of the other calamities or ills that befall the body, but the wicked and depraved ways of men. Another theologian said the description in this and in the following verses, the papists apply to the Protestants. The Protestants in turn apply to the papists. And others to heretics in general. But it is probable that the apostle had some particular age in view in which there should appear some very essential corruption. An essential corruption of Christianity is what we need to be looking for. It is no new thing to see corruption in the world. Verse 2 says, for men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good. Certainly characteristic of our present age when men and women are encouraged to love themselves. People are told to love themselves unconditionally, and that such self-love is the foundation for a healthy human personality. We don't have to be encouraged to love ourselves. We do that naturally. John Calvin said, this love of self is the foundation for all the depravity that follows in Paul's description. But readers should note that lovers of themselves, which comes first, can be regarded as the source from which all the others that follow will spring. Paul said in Romans chapter 12, verse 3, for I say, through the grace given to me, to everyone who is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, as God has dealt to each one a measure of faith. So we must see ourselves as we really are, both the bad of what we are in the flesh and the glory of what we are in Christ. Verse 4 says, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Verse 5, having a form of godliness but denying its power, from such people turn away. When we talk about the power of godliness, it means the sense of power to give me what I want. But this is exactly the opposite of what Paul means here. The power of godliness that men will despise in the last days is the power it should have to guide their lives. Power in the sense of rightful authority is what they'll hate. And many today deny that God has the power to tell them what to do through his word. Verse 6 says, "For this sort are those who creep into households and make captives of gullible women, loaded down with sins, led away by various lusts." Paul singled out gullible women here just simply because in that day, that's where the women were. They were spent far more time in the home than the men did, and were far more exposed to any corruption that might infiltrate the household. Verse 7 says, "Always learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth." And that's the verse we're looking for here. Many who are trying to come here on this platform as with some kind of message from God for you, or some kind of you're an apologist, or you're something, and you come here in the name of God to tell everyone about what's happening in the world. Always learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. The spirit of the last days has a certain intelligence about it. The high priests of the spirit of the last days know how to make things work and how to lead you away by various lusts. But for all their skill, for all their marketing brilliance, for all their hundreds of thousands of viewers and subscribers and knowledge, they never come to the truth. A truth, but never eternal truth. The spirit of the last days has a problem with the idea of true truth. People believe that we each create our own truth, that we each are the center of our own universe. According to the spirit of the last days, there is no truth outside of ourselves. Filmmaker David Lynch says there's an ocean of consciousness inside us all. If that's where people are looking, then they're never going to come to God's eternal truth. There are many professors of Christianity who live this way today. They repeatedly hear, perhaps even they hear good sermons, but they don't seek after understanding of God's truth. They don't study what they hear. And so they derive very little profit from God's word, from God's precepts. They never grow in grace. They tread water. They're always hearing, and as James exhorts, never doing. They do not bother to think or study. They don't bother to meditate, not in the Eastern sense, but to think on and chew on God's word, to consider it. And so they don't put what they hear into practice. They're hearers but not doers. This person with a dead heart could not even under the greatest preaching, not even under the preaching of an apostle himself, could become wise to salvation. Similar stories from Jeremiah as he was looking for one righteous man, couldn't find it. He turned to the great men, those positions of importance and appearance of authority and success. Surely a righteous man could be found among them. But Jeremiah's search ended in disappointment, because the men who even the men who appeared to be wise and said they served God were rebels. Perhaps even they were successful rebels. Maybe they looked the part. Nonetheless, rebels against God. So if you think the headlines are a good way to judge the true direction the world is headed, and it's all going to be over soon with the Lord coming in brightness and glory to catch us up with Him while He deals with the wicked and torches the earth, turning all our enemies to ash, I would suggest to at least challenge yourself to think about it another way. According to Scripture, of course, The kingdom does not necessarily advance according to your feelings. The kingdom does not necessarily advance like a rocket lifting off. It's more like a slow hike in bad weather up the slopes of a steep mountain. Always remember Jesus' persecution to the world, the religious leaders, the Roman government, the Jews, and the Greeks. The headlines would have read something like Galilean terrorist apprehended, executed, hail Caesar. The Jewish religious leaders believed that they had honored God by executing Jesus, and the disciples were so deflated that they disbanded in fear that they too would be next to be arrested and executed. And we read clearly in John 15 and 16 that while the world was sure it had won the day, and Jesus' followers were shocked and in hiding, just the opposite was actually occurring. To their eyes, it looked like it was all over. But in reality, Jesus Christ had just changed the course of history. The church age had begun. The Roman Empire's days were numbered. The temple would soon be reduced to a pile of smoldering rocks, and the ministry of the Holy Spirit had begun. The gospel went to all the world, and the world saw the greatest and fastest advance in technology, standard of living, health, and prosperity in all of history. John 15:24, if I had not done among them the works which no one else did, they would not have sinned. But now they have both seen and hated me and my Father as well. But they have done this to fulfill the word that is written in their law. They hated me without a cause. Jesus quotes Psalm 69. Those who hate me without a cause are more than the hairs of my head. Those who would destroy me are powerful, being wrongfully my enemies. The irony of this quotation is clear. Those who posed as the champions of the law were fulfilling the prophecy concerning the enemies of God's servant. Don't allow yourself to be taken with grief and anxiety when you see the headlines. Davos 2023. Don't let yourself be taken with grief and anxiety when you see the headlines and you see that the wicked are prospering. Those who posed as the champions of the law were fulfilling the prophecy concerning the enemies of God's servant. God is sovereign, and it is in times like these that He brings the greatest change and growth to His church. Jesus said, you're going to have a hard time here. You're going to have trouble, but take heart. Be of good cheer. I've overcome the world. Soon after Jesus ascended to heaven, persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem because of their preaching about Him and His resurrection. Acts chapter 4. Next, Stephen was stoned to death for preaching the gospel about Jesus. Following that, a great persecution was directed against the church in Jerusalem, and everyone except the apostles left for other places, preaching the gospel as they went. Herod then killed James, brother of John, and arrested Peter with the intention of executing him as well. Acts 12. These are just a few examples of life in the early days of the Spirit-filled church that's presented in Acts. And what happened next? The church exploded throughout the world. So don't let the headlines get you down. All right. That'll be all for tonight, my friends. All right, son. Tell the folks good night.
Good night, everybody. It's getting to be the wee hours.
Yeah.
That was very edifying. Thank you.
Well, I want to take an opportunity to thank my wife for being here with me and to do this work and coming alongside as my co-laborer in this work. I want to thank all of
It's my honor.
I want to thank all of you for your support and for your prayers. If you would, please pray for this work and pray for us as we do it. We need your help. It's not always easy when you have the mark on you. The devil wants to make the work hard. He wants to make the path hard. He wants to make just regular life difficult. But he can't touch us, can't hurt us. And with our family together, praying for one another, we're going to take this message as far as the Lord wants it to go. God bless you, my friends, and we'll see you again here next time.
God bless.
Well, that's a rather interesting position coming from a man on a crusade against the evils of technology.
I'm not against technology, Doctor. I'm against the men who deify it at the expense of human truth.
Armor of Truth, live.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism,
Faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights and to create a new world order.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel and log on armoroftruth.net.